Sometime after the PlayStation 2, GameCube, and Xbox generation was reaching its end, the platformer subgenre known as Collect-a-thon became a very rare breed. Ever since that time, it seemed like the only way to make your platformer successful was to make it very fast-paced and linear. Studios moved away from large open levels and hub roles locking progression behind collecting coins, bananas, or whatever. But was that done out of necessity, or did the designers lose interest in the formula themselves? Well, we're not here to focus on discussing that. Whatever the case, there definitely were players missing seeing new Collect-a-thon platformers, like the original Super Mario 64, Banjo-Kazooie, or the original Spyro trilogy. Yes, I do believe all of those count. Banjo-Kazooie is usually the first one that comes to mind when people talk about Collect-a-thons, or the second that comes to mind when talking about Rare. I'm not gonna explain the entire history of Rare here, but my partner Soha made a retrospective on Donkey Kong Country that dives a bit into their earlier years. So you should check that one out after you're done watching this. Anyway, Rare used to be one of Nintendo's strongest third-party supporters until they were acquired by Microsoft in September 2002. However, Rare's output never recaptured what the classic fans liked about the game since. Although, not everything they made could be considered a flop. After all, their latest finished project, Sea of Thieves, was a big success. But it's important to note Rare gradually lost their experienced staff members that made those other games like Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie, Perfect Dark, and whatnot. This caused many of the older Rare fans to blame Microsoft or Nintendo, but according to ex-Rare employees like Gavin Price, the narrative doesn't match reality as Microsoft was very supportive of the studio. Sometime in 2014, some of the ex-Rare veterans decided to start a new studio. Among the founders of the studio was Stephen Hurst, Gavin Price, Jens Restemeyer, Chris Sutherland, Mark Stevenson, and last but not least, Steve Mayles. This studio would be known worldwide with the launch of a Kickstarter campaign in 2015. That studio's name was Playtonic, and their campaign was Yooka-Laylee, a 3D platformer rare rival, with the pun making the intention behind the project very explicit. As a side note, Greg Mayles, who was a prominent director at Rare, did not join his brother at Playtonic and did in fact stick with Rare until very recently in 2025. And yes, the Stamper brothers also didn't join Playtonic, but let's face it, they were never going to. As the name implies, this game was pitched to the public as a 3D platformer calling back to the platformers made by Rare in the late 90s for the Nintendo 64, with the biggest inspiration being, of course, Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo-Kazooie were named after musical instruments, the banjo and the kazoo. Yooka-Laylee were named after one instrument, the ukulele, or Yooka-Laylee as some of you English speakers might say. The Kickstarter page set the expectations for a platformer that would follow the Nintendo 64 formula, but with graphics and level design that would still feel very modern. The campaign was a huge success, with the original goal of 175,000 British dollars being quickly surpassed, ending with over 3.2 million US dollars from over 74,000 backers. Suffice to say, this proved that there were indeed many fans still interested in this dying subgenre of games. The game would come out in April 2017 for the PC, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. A Switch version would get its own release later. Playtonic personally handled the PC and Switch versions, while Team 17 became in charge of porting to the other platforms. The release was definitely not as celebrated as the Kickstarter campaign itself. The game was seen as lukewarm by critics and many players. On release, it was also considered rather unpolished, especially the ports handled by Team 17. And that might be why Playtonic chose to take care of the Switch version on their own. Some of the technical issues would be fixed by patches, but unfortunately the damage was already done for the most part, and there were problems with the game beyond the technical level that could not be fixed. That said, commercially Yooka-Laylee didn't fail. In less than 2 years since the April release, the game sold over 1 million copies, which is fine for the scope of the game. Playtonic must have thought it was a good amount since the characters would star in another game in 2019, this time as a Donkey Kong Country style 2D platformer. There were no official sales numbers for this one, but critically it was received fairly well. In fact, from the little I played it, I thought it controlled better than the Retro Studios Donkey Kong Country games. Playtonic likely didn't want to let their mascots be forever associated with mediocrity, and I think that's really commendable because I think any other studio would just have given up after the first Yooka-Laylee game and scrapped the IP. I mean this with no malice, I really do think it speaks of their artistic commitment. Besides, I really like the main character's design. So, is Yooka-Laylee really that bad? Or is it secretly a very good game actually? Well, I did in fact complete the game 100% completely on the Nintendo Switch in all of its 30 frames per second glory. So let's start the review proper. The story begins with a guy who looks like a cross between Gru from Despicable Me and a bee getting promoted as the new president of some big corporation. His first strategy is to claim monopoly over the book industry or something, using an invention from his assistant Dr. Quack to suck books from all over the world and hopefully obtain a special book known as the One Book in the process. This one book is supposed to have the power to rewrite the entire universe. I don't know how this guy got promoted, but stealing phones from all over the world will be a much better business plan. Who even reads books these days? This one book happens to be very close to the company's headquarters, as Yooka, a chameleon, and Laylee, a bat, seem to have made a home out of a shipwreck nearby and had the book in their possession all along. Come to think of it, how did the ship even crash there? Anyway, the duo is just chilling when they see the book fly in the air, getting caught by Quack's invention, and its pages is spontaneously being torn out of it. The two immediately begin the quest to recover and restore the book because Laylee thinks a book with golden pages must be worth a ton of money. This leads them into Capital B's large factory, the Ivory Towers, and within the towers they must find the book's very sentient pages, who call themselves pages. The pages have the power to restore and unlock tombs that serve as portals to areas where most of the other pages can be found. How did so many pages end up in those alternate worlds if the books were closed when the one book was stolen? You know what, let's stop asking these questions. The setup is definitely a lot less personal compared to Banjo-Kazooie. Laylee wants the book back, but there isn't much of an emotional investment compared to rescuing a family relative or having your home get destroyed by evil magic. That said, I'm fine with this. Not every story needs to have high stakes, and not every protagonist needs to be motivated by a sense of justice. Although Yooka himself does have the traits of a more typical protagonist. He's generally friendly, adventurous, and more altruistic, while Laylee is more egocentric, snarky, and unapologetically rude. How did the two of them become friends the first— Oops, sorry, no questions. Their different personalities feel more fleshed out than the duo they're inspired by, and they make the conversations with NPCs entertaining to read, which is the main point. I like Dr. Quack as a character, as well as Trouser, the snake who sells character moves. But Capital B was just not very interesting from a design or writing standpoint. I honestly wish they replaced him with a different villain for the next game. I didn't find most of the NPCs very memorable, even if some of them show up more than once, like Vandy who sells you tonics that enable special skills and effects. At least Vandy's design clearly relates to what her role is. Scientist Lady, however, just seems to be an octopus just because, and doesn't have any personality. Not to try drawing too many comparisons to Banjo characters, but Mumbo had the same role as her, and he had more of a quirky and discernible way of talking and acting. She doesn't even look like she's aware of where she is. The bosses were more memorable by comparison. They have their own quirks and some of their dialogue can be pretty funny. The game doesn't ever turn off the comedy toggle and the story isn't supposed to be taken very seriously. But that also means not every joke is going to be funny for everyone. That's just how it goes. I really like some of the mean or blunt responses Laylee gives to other characters, and I appreciate the frequency of innuendo kids will probably not understand. I feel like this is a lost art in family-friendly media these days. Some of the adult humor caught me really off guard actually. Some of the jokes reference old material from Rare, and at least one seems to reference Xbox stuff. Like a robot boss that looks like the Xbox Kinect at all. The boss's name? Inept. I don't know if this can be considered an intentional jab since supposedly the designers left the Xbox game on good terms, but it's still very funny. Now my biggest criticism is the lack of solid world building and how the book theme is handled. I just don't think there was enough correlation between the worlds you visit and the storybook motif. Aside from the last world, none of the 5 look like places that could only exist within a book. They look more like places that could easily exist somewhere in the world the duel came from. If you replace the books and pages with literally anything else, not much changes about the setting and the story. If the roads were designed with the idea of being universes you can only find inside books and more fantastic or disconnected from what the hub road looks like, I think much of that lack of correlation would be improved. When you think about it, most books don't contain stories of fiction, but I still think it would make the theme more interesting and fleshed out if it felt less like portals taking you to a corner of the road. But I realize with 2 years development time and limited budget, that's kind of a big ask. Hopefully that's something that can be considered for the sequel. Overall, the story is as simple as it had to be, with an anti-capitalist greed message that is very present without getting too preachy, and a support cast that could have been better. The humor makes the dialogue enjoyable to read, and the main characters have their personality fleshed out enough. But Capital B is still a boring villain in my opinion. The game is a collect-a-thon. The term should be self-explanatory, but in case you were born in the PlayStation 2 era, the goal is to reach the final boss of the hub road, the Ivory Towers. But in order to do that, you need to collect pages scattered around the towers and the 5 tomes contained within. To collect pages, you have to explore the roads using an arsenal of moves, which you expand by unlocking more moves from Trouser. Every road has a set list of moves to be unlocked, and each move costs a certain amount of quills. And yes, you collect those by exploring the levels too. Each level has 200 quills and 25 pages. Quills are usually found on the paths you take to reach points of interest or scattered in the corners of those areas. Sometimes they seem to be located in completely random spots with no rhyme or reason other than to make the search take longer. It can get tedious to collect all 200 of them. Pages, however, are always tied to platforming challenges, minigames, or helping NPCs with their personal troubles. Helping NPCs often involves fetch quests or beating their minigames. But really, this genre is all about exploring and using your platforming skills. The fetch quests are there to give you the reason to do both things. Some of them can get boring, like having to keep track of which snowman needs which head in Glitter Glaze Glacier, or the biggest offender, keeping track of all the casino chips in Capital Casino. Yuck. But others are plain fun platforming challenges involving reaching the goal after activating a switch or reaching the end of an indoor obstacle course. The minigames should upset a lot of people, but personally I found most of them not any worse than the minigames Rare's old platformers had. Heck, I found the minigames here a lot less annoying than the ones in Banjo-Kazooie or Donkey Kong 64, and to me it's not even close. But are they fun to play? Not really. For the most part they're kind of underwhelming, and the challenge often comes from the forced handicaps and clunky controls, which to be honest can also be said about those rare platformer minigames. At least none of them are very difficult, with the exception of 2 of the minecart challenges. Or 3 if we count this incredibly obnoxious minecart boss. Everybody I know who played this game hates this boss with a passion, and I can definitely see why. It's only the 4th road's boss, yet this fight has to be done entirely on a minecart with unresponsive controls and lasts 3 freaking long phases. Raxtra's Zone minigames are also heavily criticized. But again, aside from not being very exciting, I don't think they're that bad. My own complaint about them would be, again, the lack of correlation between theme and execution. They're supposed to be games Yooka is asked to play in a giant arcade cabinet to beat a high score, but most of them don't play like actual arcade games, at least not any more than any other minigame. There are always a handful of pages that require transformations to be obtained. To transform you need to find a molecule hidden somewhere in the road and use the scientist lady's machine. These work similarly to Banjo-Kazooie transformations, with your movement and abilities varying by form. You can only use that transformation within that road, and for some forms, falling to the water will turn you back to normal. Personally, I always look forward to turning back to normal, because the transformation's design can look horrifying. I mean, look at this! Yooka-Laylee turn into 2 parts of a single body! Ew! Of all the transformations, my favorite is by far the ship form in the last road. It controls the best. Navigating that sea of stars and having 3 weapons to use is pretty awesome. Even the boss you find in the ship form is one of the better ones. Normally, these types of games lock progression in the hub road behind reaching certain amounts of the main collectible. In Yooka-Laylee, only the final area demands a minimum amount of pages, 100, which is a pretty high requirement considering each of the 5 roads has 25. The rest of the hub areas are locked behind your character abilities. So it's more accurate to say collecting quills is what indirectly allows you to progress in the Ivory Towers. The worlds are relatively small and compact at first, but the game gives you the choice of expanding each of them for the cost of a few pages. To be honest, I'm not sure why this is a choice in the first place. There is no reason to keep the world small, as their expanded forms are literally just more complete versions. If the intention was to give the non-completionist players the freedom to keep the roads more manageable, I don't think it works that well. That 100-page requirement practically forces you to expand at least some of them. Supposedly, each road was designed by a different member of the team. That explains why each road seems to suffer in one aspect and excel in others. But one thing they all share is how excessive the empty space is and how easy it is to get lost. I read a large portion of the levels feel barren, and it can be hard to keep track of where a location you're looking for is because the layouts get pretty messy. The swamp level is the worst in this aspect because your vision to some of the points of interest gets obstructed very often, and moving across some of the areas is very laborious thanks to the whole world being surrounded and split by poisoned water. Actually, even the last world the water hurts you. So maybe they were making a nod to the Euro platformers of the 90s. You unlock the ability to roll around for faster traversal and going up slopes and slippery terrain, but this is one of the moves that deplete your energy bar. To refill the energy bar, you're supposed to touch butterflies, which can also be eaten to restore your health. This is probably the weirdest design choice in the game. If you need to restore your health and you touch a butterfly instead, guess what? It doesn't work. Same goes for anyone if you need the energy. Suffice to say, there have been quite a few situations in which I accidentally touched a butterfly I meant to slurp. You can use a tonic from Vandy to make your energy bar refill faster or last longer, but it's generally better to find the health and energy extenders located in each roll to permanently increase both gauges. Yooka and Laylee also have other abilities tied to their species. For example, Yooka can learn to become transparent to move undetected since he is a chameleon. He can also become sticky if he tastes strange goo or glow in the dark, or slurp fruits to breathe fire, ice, or grenades just like any real chameleon should. Laylee learns to use sonic abilities to reveal hidden objects that cause a big sonic explosion around her. Once you unlock the flight ability, which I strongly advise you make your first priority, it becomes much easier to explore the expanded worlds. You can take off from just anywhere, and while the controls aren't perfect, they're good enough that you can go anywhere as long as there is enough space to fly. And you can even render much of the platforming challenges completely irrelevant. Okay, the last part is probably not a good thing. But honestly, I really love the sense of freedom this ability provides. It always feels great to look around or somewhere in the distance then just throw Laylee upwards and blast off. And while this does deplete your energy, you cover way more distance compared to the reptile roll. Speaking of blasting, the swimming controls aren't super great, but the game makes up for it with the Breathe Bubble ability. Yooka will literally fart underwater to cause a giant bubble to form and allow you to move underwater without fear of running out of air. But you only know that's what's going on because of the dialogue you get when unlocking the skill. As I mentioned earlier, the dialogue in this game is entertaining and sometimes a reward itself for helping out the other characters. The controls feel responsive when you're doing your basic platforming moves, but during minigames and transformations, that's a different story. They seem to become less responsive by design. I don't know why so many Western developers focus so much on adding too much weight to character movement at the expense of responsiveness, but that's what it feels like sometimes with some of the abilities and minigames. I don't care if your character is a slim, naked lizard or a buff gorilla with a necktie. Platformers feel infinitely better to play with snappy controls no matter what. Despite the many issues with the minigame controls being very unresponsive, the collectible tracking becoming a pain in places like the first and fourth world, and the layout of the levels taking a long time to get used to, I actually enjoy the gameplay just enough to go for a completionist run. The roads could definitely have been much better designed, but when I wasn't trying to find 2 or 3 missing quills, I had a great time exploring everything at my own leisure. The main strength of this sub-genre is just how open-ended each level is. A few challenges were required to unlock a move in a different level, but most of them can be completed whenever you want. The character moves help make the experience more like a sandbox compared to other platformers, at least once you have all of them. I genuinely think Yooka-Laylee controls better than any of Rare's Nintendo 64 platformers, which personally I never thought felt great to control in the first place, so I don't agree with the comments about how terrible it feels here at all. But I do think this game suffered from holding the Banjo-Kazooie or Twin Inspiration a bit too close to its chest. That's just my opinion though. I think most Kickstarter backers knew what we're gonna get. As for the camera problems, I haven't had that many issues actually, but I played this game after it was done with its patches. The visual presentation is a bit all over the place. Overall, I really like the characters designed by Kevin Bayliss, who is another ex-Rare veteran who had previously designed the Donkey Kong Country characters. I was never much of a fan of the character designs in Rare's Nintendo 64 games. I know a lot of fans have nostalgia for Banjo and Kazooie, but to me, these designs are improving in every conceivable way. The main duo are especially well designed. They have very identifiable silhouettes and colors that contrast very well. They don't have any excess of unnecessary accessories which can make them look over-designed, and both of them are species not commonly chosen for protagonist roles. All in all, they definitely look extremely merchandise-friendly. That might sound like a weird way to put it, but when it comes to mascot characters, that's a big compliment. I can't give that same level of praise for most of the other characters though. I hate to use the term generic since it practically lost its original meaning over the years, but that's how I describe enemies and NPCs that aren't just objects with eyeballs. The quality of the models themselves are mostly fine, it's just that many of those support characters look like they could be in any random kid's 3D game or cartoon. I feel particularly strong about my character design opinion since among the art commissions I do for a living now and then, I get commissioned to help design characters from scratch or update a client's character design. In terms of animation, it's normal to put a lot of less detail into NPCs, but during dialogue and cutscenes there is some very serious lack of emoting. I don't think being a spiritual successor to a game where there was basically next to no emoting justifies us. NPCs will loop through the one animation cycle over and over rather than talking to you or not. Even Yooka will loop through the same couple animation cycles in every conversation no matter the context. Like, why does he keep gesturing no to people asking for help? Is he trying to deny their problems? The art direction concepts didn't get translated super well into the modeling of the roads you explore. Some locations and vistas look fine, but the colors seem very muted and some of the textures stand out or don't blend well with the art style. The resolution in those textures is also very uneven, with some looking fine and some looking like a real smeary mess. But maybe that's because I was playing the Switch version. And I swear I'm not trying to be mean, but the particle effects are probably the worst aspect of the visuals. Speaking from the little experience I had playing with Unity 3D in college, the fire, smoke, explosions and all of Yooka's power-up projectiles look like the kind of visual effects a student could do with Unity's default assets back in 2015. This really destroys the immersion if you notice those things. As I mentioned previously, the roads you'll visit look more like locations that could have existed in the road Yooka-Laylee came from, rather than written fiction or alternate roads. Only the last road you visit looks appropriately fictional. The visual storytelling in the roads is also very lacking. There doesn't seem to be any major narrative you can piece together based on the environment and NPCs you meet that would be tied to the fact you're entering the pages of a storybook. Again, only the 5th road does something to this extent with the 2 warring factions. Yeah, as much as I like the main character's design and the expressive animation displaying the file select screen, I was disappointed by the visual presentation. Speaking of the file select, the main theme that plays in there is very charming. The melody in the main motif is very simple but also incredibly catchy. Hell, I like it more than the main motif in Rare's games. Music for the game was done by 3 composers, Grant Kirkhope, David Wise and Steve Burke. You have a main theme for the game and themes for each road, and those themes are rearranged for different sections and scenes within those roads. Fans of Rare's Nintendo 64 games should feel right at home with this music direction. Some people refer to those as leitmotifs, but technically, variations of the exact same complete track aren't leitmotifs. A leitmotif would be more comparable to multiple tracks reutilizing a short section or phrase of a song. Most tracks here are more akin to changes in the mood using the exact same music. I'm generally not the biggest fan of Kirkhope's choice for instruments, but he is one of the masters at composing catchy and memorable tunes, and they're always a perfect fit for the atmosphere of the games. But really, all 3 composers are known for the fantastic track record, and I have 0 complaints about the soundtrack here. it takes a lot for sound effects to bother me. I wasn't annoyed or uncomfortable with any of the sounds, but the choice to go with a lot of stock cartoon sound effects definitely cheapened the presentation. Some of it may have been deliberate, but I have a feeling some was included due to budget or time constraints. Lastly, this isn't a flaw with the presentation, but just like in those old rare platformers, every character speaks in grunts or whatever noise someone's mouth can make without formulating words. This is completely by design, and the vast majority of fans who are looking forward to this game expected and wanted it to be this way. Me, personally, I never liked this approach. I tend to prefer characters having no voice in dialogue at all or being fully voice acted. I would love to be able to toggle between gibberish and real UK voice acting for the characters, but I know that's never gonna happen. You do have an option to shorten the grunting to only a couple seconds per text if you prefer at least. I think at this point it's a waste of time and energy to try pinpointing where things went wrong with the development. It's easy to try and put the blame on Greg's absence since he was the main director in many of the game's classic rare fans loved, but I think it's important to realize even though much of the old crew was all here and fully committed to make Yooka-Laylee a true revival of the subgenre, they haven't been able to make a game like this for nearly 15 years. Any other team would face the same struggles if they tried to recreate something after such a long time. If I had to play armchair project manager, I think the main issue is that they needed more time to work on it, and a bigger budget. Sure, the Kickstarter was a huge success, but even for a game of this scale made by a relatively small team, it takes a lot more to get it done. Which is why so many of these crowdfunded games end up partnering with experienced publishers sooner or later. Can I recommend Yooka-Laylee to anyone? Maybe if you're a really hardcore rare platformer fan who really wants to live some of that Banjo-Kazooie or Tui nostalgia. And even then, you might be underwhelmed because the level design and the collectibles don't synergize as well as in those two games. For fans of 3D platformers in general, if you have no kind of attachment to that Nintendo 64 era, there is literally no reason to play this game. Because Yooka-Re-Playlee exists. In 2024, seemingly out of nowhere, Playtonic launched a trailer for Yooka-Re-Playlee, a recreation of the original Yooka-Laylee meant to celebrate 10 years of the studio. It was speculated they would have been working on a sequel since the first did well commercially, and the spin-off side-quel entry was all around well received. I don't think anyone expected this kind of announcement instead, and speaking for myself, my first reaction was mostly just asking myself, why? Why bother? Why not just move on and work on Yooka-Laylee too? Following the announcement, they'd start sharing more information about what exactly the game would be, and it sounded like a bit more than just taking the original and making it look better graphically, although the visual enhancements teased were pretty cool. The game was going to be rebalanced and there will be a number of quality of life changes to make it play closer to the standards of modern games. That sounded good. Then they also confirmed you would no longer unlock moves at Trouser, instead you would start with all of them. And that sounded not so good. You shouldn't remove the main feature that gave the players a sense of character progression. Playtonic had grown since then, both literally and figuratively, so there was no way this version of the game would turn out better than the original in some way, right? This time, Team 17 was not involved. Instead, the publishing would be done by Playtonic's own publishing subsidiary, Playtonic Friends, in partnership with PM Studios. Playtonic Friends had some experience publishing indie titles like Logator Game, which seems right up your alley if you enjoy a short hike, and Demoturf, which is a 3D platformer Sora was unimpressed by. While PM Studios might be better known for publishing Black Myth, Wukong, and Bakeru. I wish I could find information about why this game needed two publishers, but ultimately these decisions were done for the better. They gave a discount to owners of the original version, and I happen to have two copies, one on Switch and one on Steam. So I caved in and bought Re-Playlee, expecting a good looking remaster with some refined gameplay but not much beyond that. And what I ended up getting was probably the greatest surprise of the year. Make no mistake, Re-Playlee is not just a remaster, it's a complete remake and not the same game as the original with some minor adjustments. From the ground up, this is set out to be a different experience. We'll go over the differences compared to the original, but I'll try not to repeat too many of the comments I had about it. The plot is basically the same, and so is much of the dialogue, but you can tell something's changed right from the start. You're given a proper introduction to the main duo and how the ship crash landed in that creek. Rather than the one book just happening to be in their possession, finding the book is the first playable section in the game. And on that note, the one book is given a better explanation of how its powers work. In fact, that's the game's explanation for why you start with all the moves of the original game. Honestly, that was really clever, Playtonic. Capital B's scheme seems way more focused on getting the one book this time. Dr. Quack's invention is still vacuuming books all over, but the book monopoly thing only gets a passing mention in the intro now. And just like before, the one book is called by an invention, but the pages are separated from it so its powers can't be misused. The introduction is both more detailed and better paced from a storytelling standpoint. Like I said, the dialogue is largely the same as before, but some extra dialogue was added here and there, and some of it was completely changed to reflect on the changes in the gameplay and context. Unfortunately, when it comes to the jokes, the changes were pretty hit or miss, or just odd. For example, during one of the first conversations with Trouser, Laylee doesn't tease him about the missing roof in his so-called office. And in one of the new conversations with an NPC, Laylee insults Yooka's intelligence for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And one of the innuendo jokes in the Galleon Galaxy world that implied Yooka was quote-unquote better with his tongue got removed entirely with no replacement. I mean, come on guys, that was just extra character development! Another change I wasn't too fond of has to do with Capital B and Dr. Quack. In the original, there is a certain plot twist involving Quack. That twist is now completely gone, and honestly it makes Quack ever so slightly more one-dimensional as a result. You also no longer get a glimpse of the board of shareholders or chairman or whatever that Capital B has to answer to. I guess both changes were done to make their motivations easier to follow. A couple of the recurring NPCs had bigger changes in dialogue because their roles changed almost completely. Why? Because now they're tied to two new exclusive features, which leads us into the gameplay changes. Now this is where things got very interesting. You can probably tell from the footage so far, but a lot has changed here, and at the same time, a lot might look the same. But trust me, even while you're exploring the same hub as before, and the same 5 roads as before, this game often feels almost unrecognizable. The main objective didn't change too much. You have to reach the office where Capital B is to recover the one book, and you'll only be allowed inside if you collect a minimum amount of pages. This time, you need 120 pages, which is more than before. But here's the catch, there are way more pages to be found, a total of 250 across the 5 roads and the Ivory Towers. So you need less than half the total amount this time. And increasing the number of pages might sound like a bad idea, but the pacing at which you find pages is drastically accelerated compared to the original. Sometimes you even get a trio of pages at once, just like in Super Mario. Nope! Too easy. I'm not gonna say it. Anyway, the challenges you complete to collect pages are more focused on platforming or reaching the end of a subsection in a road that plays like obstacle courses. You still run into NPCs occasionally asking for help, but even their tasks were streamlined to be less tedious to complete. For example, the snowman and glitter glaze were repositioned so you don't waste anywhere near as long tracking the owners of each missing head you find. The mini-games also feel better to play, sometimes just as a result of the much improved controls and sometimes due to the removal of the more unfun handicaps they used to have. I actually really enjoy the minecart challenges, although if you still end up not liking them, you might have a hard time, as to compensate how easier they are to clear, you need a perfect score to get all 3 pages you can get from each track. Speaking of the minecart, yes, they did fix the inept boss battle from the casino world. By fixing, I mean that boss became a complete joke. But between being ridiculously easy and unnecessarily punishing and dragging on for an eternity, I think I'll take ridiculously easy, thanks. Keep in mind they removed the functions for slowing down or accelerating while riding, and the original design of this fight was built around those functions. Oh, and if you fail either the boss or the standard cartridge challenges, the process of choosing to retry them is way faster than before. A few level sections were either removed or changed to improve the overall flow of the game, and some new challenges were added to fill what used to be areas with nothing interesting in them. Some of these new challenges include collecting coins before the timer runs out to make a page appear. Yeah. The emphasis on platforming challenges works well with this remake, because the duel now controls like a dream. Even if you start rolling around, the controls don't get any worse. And what is that? No energy bar while you're rolling? That's right, you can actually roll as much as you want. You still have an energy bar to worry about when using other abilities though. The number of quills has decreased from 200 per world to 150, and the world expansion mechanic is no longer a thing. The worlds are expanded from the start, and if you remember my thoughts about that mechanic, it shouldn't surprise you that I think this was a good change. While I appreciate they seem to play squirrels in groups of 3 or 4s more often, I don't think they're that much easier to track than they used to be. They did give each world quills of a unique color, and I thought at first this was a pointless aesthetic change, until I saw what they've done to Trouser. Since all your moves are unlocked from the start, Trouser can't be a set of character moves anymore. Instead, he sells you upgrades in exchange for quills. And each world gets its own exclusive selection, which is why the quills have different colors. His shop replaces the health and life extenders used to find hidden in the roads. He also lets you unlock other benefits like a few cosmetics and more slots for carrying tonics. That's right, not even Yooka-Laylee could escape the modern games industry's love for character costumes. And if Trouser's small selection of cosmetics isn't enough, you can buy a lot more of those from Vandy. Vandy will also sell you tonics that enable useful and not so useful abilities. On average, her tonics are more useful than not this time, and thanks to Trouser's shops you can activate more than one tonic at a time. But her shop doesn't take quills, she only takes coins, quids as they're called. It was after the game reintroduced these two NPCs that I realized why Playtonic was so confident about letting us start with all of Yooka-Laylee's moves. Personally, I can take or leave the costumes, as I'm a really boring guy who doesn't care for 90% of the cosmetics any game puts out, but the new tonics and Trouser's upgrades work tremendously well to keep that sense of character progression. Tying them to the collectibles instead of locking hub areas behind quills or character moves makes the Collect-a-thon aspect much less of a chore. Coins are very plentiful, and you can always revisit roads to get more coins if you really want to. If you want to unlock every costume or part for whatever reason, you absolutely need to do this. Pages you already collected become transparent in your revisits, and those transparent pages are converted into more coins, so that helps a little as well. It seems like they were really focused on speeding up the gameplay. The level design changes, the decreased focus on fetch quests, the reptile roll not costing stamina. There is also more going on from moment to moment, and that's likely why they added coins as an extra collectible type on top of the pages and quills. It's also why you seem to go from one page to another much faster than before. We already went over inept being made much easier, but every other boss had a few design changes, not necessarily making the patterns easier, just more interesting. However, it seems like the two hardest bosses, the aforementioned casino boss and the final boss in the game, were both made significantly easier to beat as a response to the feedback, probably because their fights were taking too long. The last major change I'd like to go over is Rextro. Remember this guy? His challenges were very divisive among players, so how did they address that? By completely changing what his minigames entail. First, the one negative thing I have to say about it, which I don't think anyone else on the planet will care about. His minigames have even less to do with the actual arcade gaming than before. They are short and slow-paced puzzle adventure thingies. Across all of them, the gameplay style is kept consistent, with the levels becoming slightly more challenging to beat or to reach the max rank for. so you no longer have to worry about dealing with a janky new set of rules and controls for every cabinet. I found it all to be a bit on the easy side, but I can see this new style being pretty much universally preferred over the original. It's easy, but it's very intuitive, and it's fun enough that it can be considered its own separate little game, which it practically is. Overall, the challenges in the game have become much less obtuse, to the point I really think anyone can complete this game 100% without having to follow a guide, except for maybe a few pages in the Ivory Towers. In fact, the Ivory Towers changed quite a few of their pages challenges too, so you can't rely entirely on your memory of the original game. Now let's address the elephant in the room right away. Yes, this iteration of the game is very clearly taking heavy inspiration from Super Mario Odyssey. The costumes features, the quills used as road currency, the 3-in-1 Banjo rewards, even little details like the enemies that emit expanding ring-shaped attacks. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Astrobot, a game every critic on the west side of the planet wouldn't shut up about last year, took heavy inspiration from Super Mario 3D World. And literally every 3D Collect-a-thon that came out in the late 90s was heavily inspired in Super Mario 64. Banjo-Kazooie, Spyro the Dragon, all of them. If you want to make a modern 3D platformer featuring mascot characters, Mario's latest entries will definitely be something you should look at for reference. They're damn fine games. But it would be blatant untrue and unfair to just call Re-Playlee an Odyssey clone and end at that. The game borrows from Odyssey, sure, but it still preserved quite a bit from the original and added its own spin to the features so it could turn out more as a modern platformer and less of an experience entirely reliant on how much you want to relive that Banjo-Kazooie nostalgia fest. That said, some of the Banjo DNA is still here, it's still intact, even if it got drastically reduced. The dialogue is still done in that familiar style. The characters are still talking those gibberish people love so much. The structure of a hub world containing 5 large levels and the focus of exploring each world at your own leisure and clearing challenges in any order you want are also still there. The large cast of quirky NPCs populating those worlds are still there, and so are all the transformations. So it's really more fair to say Yooka-Re-Playlee plays like what Banjo-Kazooie would be like if it was made for the current generation rather than for the Nintendo 64 era of games. More importantly, the whole experience has a level of polish to the feel of the controls, be it during the platforming or even all the minigames, that I haven't experienced outside of a first-party Nintendo game in a very long time. I really can't stress this enough, even as someone who had less trouble with the original controls than most people. Playtonic has definitely learned a lot since the original release. If there were any doubts they could still make a good 3D platformer, I think Re-Playlee should cast those doubts aside. Huh. In terms of presentation, the production quality is miles ahead of the original. Colors are more vibrant, the roads look more lively, and the cheap-looking Unity particle effects were replaced by new graphical effects that look much more professional and fitting for the game's art style. Character models were also enhanced, but if you haven't played the original very recently, you'll probably not notice much difference in their models. To be honest, the original models already looked fine, but the improved textures certainly looked better. There were also a few small design changes done to some of the main characters. Capital B looks somewhat better, so does Yooka, but then we get to Laylee. From what I've seen, this is another hill I'll have to stay lonely at. I don't like her new design. On one hand, I understand her old design doesn't allow for her to be super expressive, which the new design achieves. I have no other way to put this, I just think she was a lot cuter as a character before. And they opted to give her some super fluffy fur texturing effect, which you need a tonic to turn off, that I didn't think matched the art style very well. And if you recall, I was particularly fond of the duo's design. But the graphics are not the first thing you notice about the new presentation, although they're certainly the best change. As soon as you start the game, you will be greeted by a new title screen and menu. This should be your first clue as to how more subdued the Banjo-Kazooie influence is. Personally, I like the original title screen better. Some might say it was too similar to that Nintendo 64 game, but even if it was, at least it was more unique compared to other modern games. The familiar main theme is being played in the background, although it's a new rendition of it, a more orchestral version. I don't know, the new menu is more sleek and responsive, I'll give you that, and I do think the tools being presented look nice, but I just thought the fully animated loops going on in the original game had more charm and distinct identity to it. The menu you access during the actual gameplay, however, is far more interesting. It's much easier to navigate and follows the storybook design motif. You can track most of the collectibles using the map with hints for page challenge locations in this menu, and even teleport to quick travel spots you unlock. You also have a quick access to the list of tonics you bought and a sub-menu to change between costume parts. The dialogue window has a more unique design to it as well. I guess some might say the text is smaller as a result, but personally I found the new design much easier in the eyes. One of my complaints about the original was how little emoting the characters did. Well, some of the cutscenes there's a little bit more going on in terms of animation, but not that much. There are other moments in the game featuring new animations for the duo, however. Using the D-pad or whatever it is you press on your little computer keyboard, you can make Yooka-Laylee do some cute little gestures. Of course, every time they collect a page, you get some proper congratulations instead of the page just flying around you and the music playing. And whenever you collect one of the 5 Ghost Riders in a row, the duo will celebrate with some kind of animation, or dance, or dab as you could say. This might seem like a silly addition at first, but I think it really adds some personality to the characters in the game. Considering the dialogue presentation when talking to NPCs has improved enough, as they choose to cycle through the same animation loops as always, any animation added for any reason whatsoever is a good thing in my opinion. But all those improvements are nothing compared to the most important animation change of them all. The underwater air bubble ability. You can clearly see Yuka's effort to create the bubble. That's what they call current-gen farting technology. The game features both the original tracks and the new orchestral arrangements of them. I'm not a music specialist, but I love video game music more than music in any other media. Even so, I have to admit I barely notice much difference here. I mean, I can tell the tracks sound less synthetic, but that's about it. Honestly, that's fine by me, because like I said in my Yooka-Laylee impressions, the original soundtrack was already good. Anyway, if you like the original music, you'll probably like it here too. Sound effects still feature some of that stock cartoon noise, but it's without a doubt a very deliberate choice at this point. There's a bunch of new sound effects that don't sound like that though, so yes, even the sound direction itself has been significantly improved. I should probably have mentioned this when talking about the story and narrative, but the game's opening and ending are both presented in a bedtime story kind of way. It's additions like those that add more cohesion with the overall book theme the game's story is supposed to have. And yes, just like with the intro, the new ending gives a much more fleshed out closure to the story. I wasn't a backer of the Yooka-Laylee Kickstarter campaign, so I can't tell you how a backer must have looked at either version of the game, or if Re-Playlee met the expectations the average backer had. But as a non-backer, I can tell you I didn't think this game was going to leave such a strong impression on me. There's something about these characters, the vibrant setting, the sense of adventure, and the humor that just made me reconnect with my child self like very few games or any media in general is able to. Even though the game is full of mature humor and reference to a time no kid is going to relate to, the complete experience feels very pure and innocent in its intentions. Playing or playing this game to the finish made me remember all the past games, characters and animations that ultimately shaped the media I love. It might sound like I'm describing nostalgia, but I know what nostalgia is, and this is something different. As the saying goes, first impressions last, and convincing players who are unimpressed with the original to give Re-Playlee a spin might be a challenge. That's part of why I wanted to make this video. Do I recommend Yooka-Re-Playlee? Yeah, I think I do. Anyone who doesn't hate 3D platformers should play this. The kind of a turnaround this remake achieved from a game design standpoint is almost comparable to a Final Fantasy XIV around REBORN scenario. Although the original wasn't a terrible game by any means, and I don't want to suggest that it was anything like 14 1.0. Even if you played the original and think the returning features are still part of the reason why you didn't like it, that's no guarantee you won't have a good time with this new iteration. Many of the new features and challenges have a big impact on how you interact with the environment in the game, and the overall pace of the gameplay is completely different from before. Yooka-Laylee may have been screaming, "Remember that old classic you liked?" too loud, and I believe Playtonic noticed that. As a result, Re-Playlee doesn't feel that way at all. If you're a big Banjo-Kazooie fan, and if you're not a big Banjo-Kazooie fan, I suggest you approach this game as just a new 3D platformer. Just take experience for what it is, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. I don't think anyone who works at Playtonic will watch this, but if they do, please add a performance mode patch for the Switch 2 version. I understand Nintendo took too long to give you guys to have kids, but it's no secret Nintendo platformers always have a big fan base for platformers and fans of anything Rare adjacent. I'll even buy the game again if that happens. Yeah, I could just pick it up again on my PC, but I'd rather play it on a device that doesn't sound like a ship about to take off to space whenever a current gen game is running. Consider me the newest fan of this duo of characters. I might have to finish the Impossible Lair after all. But what about you? Have you played Re-Playlee? Got any thoughts to share about the remake or the series as a whole? We'd love to read what you think. This video took a lot of mental energy out of me. I'd really appreciate if you could show some support by liking, or hell, even disliking it, and subscribing to our channel. Or, spreading the word about it. We're always working on more short form and long form reviews, so stay tuned for more. Thank you for watching, and take care.